Howdy, everybody. Thanks for joining me for another kind of segue slash preview to the Radium series that I'll be kicking off hopefully here pretty soon. This is a segment that I didn't have time to make into the Colorado video, but is very relevant. And it is a good segue into the Radium series, as you'll see. So in this video, we'll be talking about Juanita Hot Springs, Colorado, and kind of connecting some dots between some of the aboriginals of the area. Yeah, so let's dive right in here. Thanks again, everyone, for tuning in. Follow me on this journey. Make sure to leave any comments, questions you may have on this video. And in the first real episode of the Radium series, we'll be touching on a lot of this stuff again, but we'll be kind of coming at it from the very beginning, weaving some mythology, Madame Curie, the original woman who identified radium, showing the gaps in the timeline. We'll be getting into NIMSA, how that's relevant, old world aerial technology, so on and so forth. Yeah, so this little one, and again, is just going to be about Juanita Hot Springs and the Radium Hot Springs. Radium to cure ills of the world, says Dr. Davis, 1910. Radium is to rescue humanity from its manifold ills, according to Chas Gilbert Davis, MD, LLD, eminent Chicago physician and surgeon, founder of Juanita Hot Springs Resort, who spoke in the Congregational Church Sunday evening on radium. Although civilization has been turned back 5,000 years by alcohol, which has caused war and its hideous results, made mankind insane, and plunged the world into vice, crime, disease, and attendant evils, radium will ultimately cure all and bring mankind to the golden utopia. Mr. Davis said that we are living in a new era, that in which women has been freed, and it is noticeable that a woman, Madame Curie, wow, that's incredibly strange. Alan Watts just starts playing on my phone for absolutely no reason. Interesting. Sorry about that. That a woman, Madame Curie, at the beginning of this era, made the most amazing discovery of all time. In 1898, now that's an important date. Remember this date, okay? Because if you watched my radium preview, you'll know that that date doesn't make sense. That radium, the secrets to aerial flight, 1897. Radium hadn't been discovered yet. This article is discussing radium. We're going to get into that in the series, so just keep that in mind. Madame Curie discovered and demonstrated radium, the greatest discovery in the scientific world. It has added 30 new elements, opened up a great field of study, and given years of life to women. It has aided the practice of medicine 100-fold. Dr. Davis said if he were called upon to discard radium or all other instrumentalities used in medicine, he would keep radium and throw all else away. This is a strong statement. It has made wonderful advances in surgery. Thousands of bloody operations formerly performed are now eliminated by the use of radium. It has been 5 years since he has performed an operation for tumor. They are now removed by radium. It is the greatest discovery since the dawn of history. What is radium? One of the 130 elements. It is a metal, like gold and silver. It is hardly ever seen in the pure state. It is usually found as a salt. It is so effervescent, irritating, and corroding that it has to be carefully protected with a shield. The bromide salt is the most common form. Other things also given out emanations, uranium, thorium, etc. Lead itself is a degenerate form of radium. Remember that, you guys. Lead itself is a degenerate form of radium. Now, when they're talking about transmutation, lead to gold, they're talking about lead to radium. Lead to radium. Radium is found all over the world in small quantities. The supply of Europe is nearly exhausted, and America must furnish the bulk hereafter. This is why Colorado is incredibly important. The largest amount in the world in the early 1900s was coming from Colorado. Radium is found in both sedimentary and volcanic formations. Also very important when we talk about iron and iron oxides and these other metals. Volcanoes are going to be very important. As we get into this series, we're going to discuss what causes volcanoes, and it is radium. Radium is also found in the sea. We will also get into this to quite an extent. It's incredibly important, drives weather patterns, sea currents, Gulf Stream. All of these things are important. It, I believe, is a mechanism in the Ice Age. Has to do with radium levels. In springs and rivers, and there are emanations from the earth. Incredibly important as well. Turkish baths, caves of emanations. This takes you into the oracle at Delphi, breathing in the radium emanations from the bowels of the earth. Remember, the oracle sat upon a chair sitting over a bottomless pit in which sulfuric radiumized air caused hallucinations, which we'll get into here a little bit as we talk about Indians performing certain dances. It is in the air. Ozone has much of it, and therefore the air over the Rocky Mountains. This is important. I touched on this in the Colorado video. If you haven't seen my radium preview, please go back and watch that. If you haven't seen Anomalous America episode 7 Colorado, please go back and watch that. I'll have links in the description. Rocky Mountains has more radium in it than anywhere else in the world. This demonstrates that we have great radium beds here. Exactly. Radium has 3 uses: illumination, fertilization, and medical. A piece the size of a pinhead, if it could be properly controlled, would be enough force to light the city of London for 1 year. The size of a pinhead to light the city of London for 1 year. It has 3 rays. This is the trine principle that we were discussing in the Secrets to Aerial Flight, the radium preview. 3 principles, 3 rays: alpha, beta, gamma. And we'll get into some biblical references, overlays, metaphors that have to do with not only the periodic table, but the elements of radium. Ra mythology being an overlay with the alchemical marriage. Also, the platonic solids playing a role in this as well. They all kill bacteria. They penetrate matter through the intermolecular spaces. They change oxygen into ozone. The alpha rays travel 23,000 miles a second. The alpha rays are charged with positive electricity. 1 gram of radium bromide will discharge 10,000 million rays. 10,000 million rays a second. 10,000 million rays a second. The beta rays are charged with negative electricity that travel 170,000 million miles a second. They are used in medicine. The gamma rays are longer and stronger. They travel 200,000 million miles a second and are made up on pulsations and vibrations of ether. Eventually, we'll get into ether, the dodecahedron, the watery world we inhabit. Remember, we walk in water on Earth, in water, though. The atmosphere is water. The air we breathe is water. The oceans is just their different levels of density of ether. They will penetrate a foot of solid iron. They heal and destroy diseased animal cells. They produce 2 188,000 trillion vibrations a second. They shake the molecules up and destroy them. Properly confined, they cure. There are many radium springs like Juanita, which are the great curative value. A tube of the gas bubbles from the springs will cause a burn on the body. Scientists estimate from the gas given off by the Earth that there are 2,400 tons of radium in the Earth. When fresh from the Earth, the gas is potent. After 3 weeks, it loses its strength. It is believed that radium in the Earth causes the heat which is given off in volcanoes. Absolutely. Um, my research 100% supports this, and we're going to get into a bunch of articles later on in this series that will show you pretty substantiated reasoning that this is what's happening. And I believe they've known this for a very long time. Vulcan, these gods, these mythological characters are often representations of elements. Radium is used as an illumination for watches, gun sights, signs, etc. It is used as a fertilizer. We're going to get into this as well. It has wonderful effects on vegetation. Flowers grow with great vigor and beauty, and vegetables thrive immensely near Juanita, where they get the radium water. If you haven't seen any of my shows with Dr. Longo, we've hypothesized and covered quite a lot of this in some of the Radium Springs. My hypothesis about um, the Gulf Stream being one of the currents of radium, kind of a wormhole of radium, a magnetic current of such. And I've talked about fruits and vegetables growing tremendously and absorbing some of this radium, and the fruits themselves carrying on these curative processes. I've talked about many of the orange groves in Florida were built near or on hot springs, and that the fruit was absorbing the radium. Radium has been found in mild but high comparatively doses in oranges, lemons, limes, many of the citron family. I believe these were cultivated, as we've talked about. The apple of Eden was an orange. Oranges were a symbol of peace and prosperity and were handed out by royalty, Queen Mu, so on and so forth. Yeah, and that oranges were, in a sense, the elixir of life. And Ponce de Leon's journey to Florida looking for the fountain of youth, it was found. It wasn't lost. It was known about. The Indians knew all about this. Indians, pardon my French, but the several different cultures that inhabited Florida or the peninsula of Florida for many, 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 many thousands of years. An Atlantean download, I would say, remnant of. Back into the article. A professor at Columbia University experimented for years on plats of ground. He takes an acre fertilized and watered with radium water and an acre normally tended. The radium treated area produced 200 times as bountifully. France is building up its devastated agricultural lands by applying earth from the springs. It is producing great results. There are 5 million gallons of water a day running from Juanita Hot Springs. 5 million gallons, you guys. Which will be used ultimately for curing human beings and fertilizing lands. Now, I also didn't get time to touch on this in my Utah episode and my Arizona episode. Pitchblende and Karenite, which are carriers of radium, found in large quantities in Utah near hot springs, same in Arizona. These people were irrigating massive tracts of land with their huge endless canal systems that were beyond technology we had, and they were using radium water. And if you haven't seen my clip about giant Indian corn, go back and watch it. Colorado natives were growing corn over 12 feet high. And this was without radium water. You imagine if they took this corn and they added the radium water to it, it'd probably be 20 feet high. Biblical corn for sure. um, as a medical curative, it can be used either in the element form or as a gas. It cures tumors and cancers, stomach trouble, rheumatism, and a great multitude of ills. He quoted an eminent authority who says that any physician who does not use radium in treating fibroid tumors is doing his patients a great injustice. Now, remember, this is 1910, you guys. We're 113 years removed from this. Cancer is a $100 billion industry, and none of this exists. The methods we use today are far more cruel, not as exact. Yeah. He quoted an eminent authority and said that I apologize. It cures tubercle ulcers, has rendered great aid in ordinary tuberculosis. My apologies. Dr. Davis believes it will ultimately cure all tuberculosis. He has experimented with it at Juanita with fine results. Europe is far ahead of the United States in using radium. Dr. Davis went to Europe in 1914 and he saw the French surgeons use radium. He returned and took it up and has treated thousands of cases with success. He told Madame Curie about Juanita before radium was found in Colorado. Very important. She said this will roundabout way come back to NIMSA, Southern California, advanced aerial technology, and why Madame Curie played a role in all of this. She said that there was radium here. Later, the government scientists announced there was radium at Juanita. Radium is the greatest nerve tonic known to medicine. Dr. Davis predicts a great future for the use of radium in medicine. Dr. Davis is very enthusiastic about radium, and his talk has made one feel that radium will ultimately solve the world's ills and will be the wonderful cure all which men have sought for all ages. If Ponce de Leon, in his search for the fountain of eternal life, had come to Juanita Hot Springs, he would have found that for which he sought. Absolutely. And he found it already. He wasn't going looking for something lost. He was going looking for something that they absolutely knew existed. So yeah, that was a great introduction. I like this article so much because, like I said, it's a transition from our Colorado episode to the Radium series, which is why I'm starting the Radium series now because it's an important transition. Chaz Gilbert Davis, this article is a great synopsis. He touches on many things that we're going to cover in this series. And you know me, I'm Mr. Articles. And there's one more speech he gave about 14 years later. And we're going to dive into this as well. And this will be kind of the antithesis of it all. And since we're talking about Colorado, Utah, Arizona, we're going to talk about the Ute Indians and some of the quote aboriginals of that area and why that's important because radium was coined by Europe and given all of these technical titles, but was well known for centuries. And we're going to cover this. It's going to be kind of a segue into, or a little bit of a break, and we're going to read another oration given by Chaz Gilbert Davis, a little bit longer one, not as compact, but still very important. And we'll sum this up as kind of episode 1 of the series. And yeah, we'll get going. So this is an article from 19 1919, I believe. It may have been earlier. I can't remember exactly. This is clipped many, many years ago. Indians first used radium. Aborigines of Utah employed ore as a beautifier. So, Juanita Hot Springs was actually a hot springs that the Ute Indians held sacred until it was taken over in the late 1800s, 1890s. And you're going to find the Ute Indians had 7 or 8 different sacred springs scattered all throughout Colorado, Utah, and Arizona. Supposedly they had one in California, but I couldn't find anything about it. So this is kind of going to kind of be an esoteric segment as to what radium does psychologically, and that ceremony and things along those nature from the more primitive or um, aboriginal standpoint. These elements again were gods, silver, gold, all of these things, and they had a mythos attached to them, kind of pagan-esque, but a little bit different here in early America. So yeah, back to the article. Indians first used radium. Aborigines of Utah employed ore as a beautifier. A beautifier. So as we get into this article, we're going to talk about some of the trials they were doing. It was removing wrinkles almost instantly. They were injecting it into horses, and it was making the horses like jacked, like they were on steroids. Muscles would just explode. Their hair would be, within 24 hours, they would have a coat of hair that was unrecognizable. They would take a masticated horse, and it would be just this most beautiful prize-winning stallion in 24 hours. They were injecting some of this horse blood into people and getting some absolutely incredible results. We're going to get into some of the scientific testing they were doing. Yeah, it's going to get weird real quick. Man's first coat was paint. Reds painted their bodies bright yellow and with other pigments looked like rainbows. Mining operations show that Indians did much digging for iron oxide, which was used to decorate their bodies. Now, iron oxide is incredibly important. Iron Mountain, the lodestone, magnetic ore, lava, volcanoes. These things are all intermingled. The blood of a human, the blood of a titan, the blood of the earth, radium. These things are interconnected. The first users of radium ore were the Indians of Utah. In pre-Columbian times, they employed it, the stuff now known as keronite. Now, again, keronite, when broken down and dissolved, crystallized, that's how you get radium. Pitchblende is the higher quantity, higher purity, but keronite is the more common version. They paint their bodies a bright canary yellow. No work on eminent painters ought to omit mention of the American Aborigines, who quite generally were in earlier days wonderful colorists. It is suspected that the first coat worn by man was a coat of paint. But the early American artist, when he had adorned himself like a rainbow, the final touch perhaps being to make the lower half of his face red and the upper half green, did by no means stop that. He painted weird pictures on rocks and the faces of cliffs. He painted his wooden house or his teepee with symbolic and descriptive designs. He painted his shield and bow and arrows. He painted monstrous masks worn in ceremonies and also his pottery. Most precious to Indiana, the most precious of all things to the Indians, who even nowadays have lost their talent in the direction, was paint. A deposit of mineral pigment was to them a mine of wealth. Oxides of copper yielded blue and green paints, and from iron oxide was obtained a brilliant red. You can touch on a lot of this with petrifactions. Petrifactions can make oxides of copper and oxides of iron. Then it starts to get really trippy, the breakdown of matter and electrical discharge and so on and so forth. The first workers in the quicksilver mines of California were pre-Columbian Indians. Cinnabar, the ore of mercury, is a sulfide of the latter metal, which we call vermilion. Again, we're dealing with Solomon, the mines of Ophir, which were known as the mining regions of California, Arizona, Utah, and Colorado. That was the mining region of Ophir, or the mines of Solomon, the land of Ophir, and the Vermilion Sea, the Red Sea, the biblical Red Sea. You could look at the story of the Bible purely from an alchemical metaphor and get much information from it, as well as a real story or hero's journey, or the alchemical journey as well. Great stuff for war paint as well as for other uses. Not long ago, an important deposit of ore was opened in LaSalle, Montana. Leslie, Montana? And mining operations disclosed the fact that much digging had anciently been done there by the Indians, not for iron, but for iron oxide, contained in seams and pockets. Again, iron oxide, blood, and, many other things. Not contained in seams and pockets. For the oxide, they had burrowed in all directions, even at a depth of 25 feet. Trade was extensively developed in early days among the Indian tribes, and doubtless the pigment produced by this mine was distributed over the vast territory. The miners employed there today, when they come out after a day's work, look as if they were painted from head to foot. The same diggings in times antedate the white man yield qualities of another highly valued paint, namely yellow ochre. The latter being another compound of iron, often found associated with red oxide, paint from springs. A beautiful white paint was obtained by the Indians of the Yellowstone region from boiling springs. It was a white clay, very finely divided so that when dried it took the form of a powder. They took it out in the form of mud, which had only to be exposed to the sun in order to become first-class pigment material. Some of it had a pinkish tint. The Indian women, as well as the men, used pigments of cosmetic purposes. But unlike modern young ladies, they did not try to disguise themselves with masks of white or to adorn their cheeks and lips with rosy hues, though the white stuff from Yellowstone Springs might have furnished an excellent liquid powder. Supplemented by touches of vermilion or iron oxide, they painted their faces with quaint, conventional designs in obedience to the demands of Aboriginal fashion. Now, some of the Zuni and these other ceremonial people were painting their entire bodies with radium paint. In some instances, the radium levels were so high that they would glow in the dark. And you can only imagine, as we get farther into this series, we're going to talk about some of the mental and psychological effects of radium, what it was doing. And for me, this would be a kind of psychedelic ceremonial precursor, and that the painting themselves with radium and doing these dancing ceremonies would absolutely blast them out of this universe. And some of the rain dancing ceremonies used similar pigments, and radium is like a magnifier, an intense magnifier. And you could only imagine if your intent and your focus are on creating rain and you're using a substance like this, it must have been absolutely profound.